A risk culture primarily is a culture where the organization takes risks seriously. It's as simple as that. And there are lots of things you need to look for as a director like myself in thinking about whether the organization really takes risks seriously. If the chief risk officer doesn't seem to be taken seriously, or is not of the right caliber, or is not at the important meetings, these are just little signals that maybe not all is well with the risk culture. Other kind of small things that I look for is whether the executive management don't really believe that anything can go wrong. So I think the important part of a risk culture is to imagine that the world you're in may not always be the same as it was. And I call that imagining alternative futures for the organization. Imagining alternative futures just doesn't happen by accident. It has to be staged in some way, and you have to have very senior participants involved and willing to run with the results of it to the end. So the kind of thing one has in mind is a kind of what people call wargaming exercise, where you progressively specify conditions for the organization that are more and more serious and damaging and detrimental, and see how it runs from there. It's not just a question of sitting over a cup of coffee and thinking up bad things that might happen to you one day. I think it's building it into some structure into it, and then at the end of that process, looking back and saying, well, what have we learned? What have we learned about our current processes and how they would stand up to this particular scenario? So what must we change today? Because the alternative futures game is not just an intellectual exercise for the sake of it. It has to lead to some actions that make a difference today. Otherwise, as one executive once put it to me, yeah, it was a lot of fun, but now I've got to go back and do the day job. So I've been a chair of a risk committee for a number of years, and some of those committees have gone well and some of them have gone badly. So I've had to reflect on the reasons for that. And this would be my advice to incoming chairs of risk committees. I've come to the view that you need to refresh the agenda. And by that I mean you think you need to swap items around, not allow the agenda to become stale, devote time to presentations on specific topics. But I think another good way to refresh the agenda is to get the CRO or the CEO, better still, to start the meeting by telling the committee what they've been thinking about over the last month or so since the committee last met. Risk management in many organizations became a bureaucracy with its own purposes and own motivations, almost decoupled from managing risk. In other words, focused on the production of documentation, charts, PowerPoint slides, risk registers, in a way that was stifling and crowding out intelligent discussions about risk in the organization. Now, you absolutely need a certain kind of empirical level of evidence about what's going on, but it seemed to me that in the studies that I did, the pendulum had swung in the other direction, and that people were drowning in documentary requirements rather than thinking about risk. Risk registers are extremely useful if you are modest about what they can achieve for you. Some of the most important behavioral issues that organizations face are very hard to express in risk register terms. So for example, if the CRO and the CEO don't get on, where does that figure on the risk register? If you have a couple of domineering executives, how do you express that in the risk register? If people are frightened of escalating bad news from the factory floor, where does that go in the risk register? So one of the things a non-executive director like me has to do, and other board members have to do, is to spend time walking around the business. One of the questions I like to ask CEOs is, which part of your organization is least amenable to control? And when I get the answer to that, I try and spend some time in that part of the organization. I suppose if you put me in a corner and said, what is the one thing that I would suggest people think about when thinking about risk management, is beware of very tidy images of what is going on. Conflict is the norm in organizations, and therefore a risk management process which does not give you a window into those conflicts and tensions is misleading you.